Willow Creek Springs presents Healthy Living with your host, Joe Grumbine.
Hello, and welcome back to the Healthy Living Podcast. I'm Joe Grumbine, your host. And today I'm going to continue where I left off, where we're talking about the healthcare system. And, I told you guys about my journey as I explored trying to resolve a lung issue that I've had all my life, and how many steps had to be taken, and sometimes listening to a doctor, and sometimes thinking for myself. And I really think that that's one of the most important lessons out of this to remember. And I don't know what happened to people where they are willing to put their own life, livelihood, safety, and health completely sight unseen in the hands of somebody else. And this somebody else, you don't even know. You don't know if they care about you. You don't know what their values are. We don't really research doctors. We'll get a recommendation, or we'll find somebody who says something we like, and we'll just go, okay, he's a professional. I'm just going to listen to him. And I think about that, and I just say, wow, last time I made a parallel comparison about lawyers and doctors and how people treat them. And a lot of times somebody finds themselves in a legal hassle and they don't know anything about the legal system, the justice system, and they'll go to a lawyer and they'll just kind of do what he says. And when I was in a situation like that, I listened to the lawyer, but I also listened to my own gut, and I took what the lawyer said and went further than he had expected or asked. And the reason why is I realized after spending time in the lawyer's office and around a lot of lawyers that they generally have way too much work. They book things way too far and they don't have time to do their job right. And it's been my experience, I'd have to say 100% of the time. I've never worked with a lawyer in any way where they were on it, they were prepared, they didn't come in at the last second, they had their strategy figured out. They're always running behind, they're always, because they're smart people, so they get away with stuff. And I'm just telling you what my experience has been. I'm sure there's exceptions to this rule, but 100% of the time, anytime I was working with a client, trying to help them in their legal issues, giving advice, sharing experiences, raising support, it always last second. Oh, we got to run up and file this motion. Last second. I need this thing. Last second. The lawyer's late. Where is he? It's just always that. Well, got to figure doctors are in a similar league. They have to go through extensive training. They generally are smarter than the average bear, and they're generally exhausted once you have your credentials. Many times they have more people that want their services than they have time for, so they overbook. Then you got to try to farm out elements, which never works as well as you doing it yourself. And eventually you have what we have today. Okay, it is what it is. So we got to learn um, to navigate this. In the past, I'm gonna give you a little story about my two biological children and how they were born and how it all worked out, and compare that to today. I don't even know if I could, but um, in the late 80s, early 90s, I had two children with my first wife, and the first one was my son. And I I remember correctly, we signed up with the hospital. I didn't have any insurance at the time. And the insurance says, well, it's going to cost this much to have a labor and delivery. And you're going to have to pay for, I don't know if we had to pay for the whole thing up front or some reasonable portion of it. It wasn't that much money. It was like, I don't know, $1,500, less than a couple $1,000. I was able to, we're living tight even then, but we figured it out. Well, you get through this process, and turned out his umbilical cord was wrapped around his neck. He was in distress. So at the last second, the doctor comes in and says, "Hey, we got to do an emergency C-section." And I went in there and I watched an operation be done. And it was an interesting experience, to say the least. But at that time, it seemed that their concern was for the safety of the mom and the child, and they did what needed to be done. And eventually I got billed for it and paid for it and all, but it wasn't crazy. It didn't bankrupt me. It wasn't certainly like it is today. I don't know, even remember the numbers. This was over 30 years ago. And you remember stuff from 30 years ago probably better than I do. But anyways, then my daughter was born, and we had some kind of insurance at the time. I believe it was some sort of self-employed, low-income thing they had. I don't remember the detail, but we went to a different hospital. It was more of a private hospital, smaller hospital, and she did deliver this one naturally. But there was distress in the process, and I don't really remember. This was sort of towards the end of the marriage, and obviously things weren't connected that well. But at the end of the day, there wasn't any major complications with payments or anything. So fast forward to today, and not that long ago, this was a couple of months ago, I get hear from my daughter, and her son, my grandson, had had a little bike spill. Happens all the time. I don't know how many times I diggered on my bike, and sometimes you dust yourself off, sometimes you got to get stitched up a bit. So my daughter takes the son in, and all of a sudden they're requesting all these tests and all these scans and all these x-rays and things. And my daughter didn't want to have those things all done. Now she's a self-pay. She can handle it. This isn't not a financial issue. It's personal choice issue, parenting issue, system issue. And all of a sudden, when she rejected some of the procedures, they threw up flags, and they said, well, she's refusing treatment for her son. And next thing you know, cops are involved. Next thing you know, Child Protective Services is involved. Next thing you know, this turned out to be a big old fiasco. And they ended up coming over, doing a inspection of the house, which was no problem. And it doesn't necessarily matter if you're doing the right thing or not. The system is not designed to necessarily help you. The system's probably designed to have the fewest amount of problems and the most amount of value. But you know how the government is with these things. They're generally not that effective. And more often than not, the system just doesn't work very well. Well, that's the one we got. Fortunately, she was smart enough and willing enough to put herself in harm's way, and she was able to navigate through it. But not everybody does. And what ends up happening many times is that people get bullied into procedures and medications that they wouldn't choose if they knew the inherent risks. A doctor doesn't go over a medication with you typically and say, okay, well, I'm thinking about prescribing this medication for you. And here's the strengths and weaknesses of it. These are some other possible options. These are potential interactions. Here's what I see. They don't do that. They don't do that. And I don't care. Maybe you got that 1 in 100 doctors that'll even tell you anything about it, but they don't. They go, here's your prescription, do what I say. And either you do or you don't. And I think that's a big part of the problem is the disconnect between the physician and the conversation with the patient. And let's go back. I'm going to do we've talked about this before. I'm going to continue talking about this because I think it's instrumental and important for us to realize as we're getting into some of these root causes. You need to realize and understand that the nature of a business is to be profitable. In order to be profitable, it needs to make more money than it spends. It needs to be able to be sustainable and continue its growth as more customers come. Need to be able to provide the same or better level of service, all these sort of things. You need to be able to have an infrastructure that can handle your needs. If you have a board of directors, stockholders, well, they're expecting to make money. That is what a company does. Pharmaceutical companies are companies. First and foremost, they happen to make pharmaceutical drugs. And if we start looking at the money spent and where it gets spent, if we're just to look at that alone without any connection to what the company did, maybe it was a tire company that made or installed tires, maybe it was an airplane factory, maybe it was a farmer that grew whatever, corn, it doesn't matter. If you looked at the numbers and the projections and the specs and all the different elements that are involved with a pharmaceutical company, their choices, their growth, etc., you'll find them to be just like every other company. Their goal is to make money for their stockholders. That's it. Their lobbyists spend money so that the government institutes policies that make money for the company and their stockholders. That's it. Sometimes it turns out that a medical discovery actually helps people. Sometimes it helps people in ways that weren't expected. That's happened with Viagra, some of these new weight loss drugs. Who knows what's on the horizon as we stumble into unintended benefits and unintended consequences of playing and putting new chemicals into our bodies. But the reality is, when they need to, they fast forward what they need to. If you look at the COVID pandemic and who benefited and who suffered, I don't want this to be the reason you listen or don't listen to this show, but look at the numbers. Let them tell you. Look at the numbers. Who made all the money, who gained, and who suffered. And I think you'll realize that the companies gained and the people suffered, as generally is the case. And then finally, let's just always remember medical school, doctors training. This is the thing that we rely on for our safety and our health, is the doctor's training, right? It's why you go to a doctor, because they're trained. And who are they trained by? You look and see who the primary sponsors of teaching schools, of medical curriculum. They're all pharmaceutical companies and people that typically benefit from the sale of drugs and medical procedures. Okay, now let's just dial back our experience and think about this from a point of common sense. What does common sense tell you? If somebody's spending money to make something happen, it's generally for a purpose. What's the purpose? Well, we already talked about that. A purpose of a company is to be profitable, to make money for the shareholders in the company. If it's a nonprofit company, the goal is still to grow and make a bunch of money. They just spend it all. So in the form of salaries and whatever they spend it on, doesn't matter. You're still making it and spending it. It's just the level of profitability is different. The measure of success is different if you want to get down to it. So just remember all these things as you're moving forward. So now I want to jump into this parallel or this current situation I'm dealing with. So I got this lump. If you happen to be looking at the video, which I doubt you will, because I won't share it with too many people, but I've got this gigantic lump sitting on the back of my neck, and I'm staring at it because I'm trying to make it get smaller. But I have gone to now, for the past year, a physician. I've gotten 3 sets of tests done. And the last set of tests I had done was a CT scan. And I have a second doctor that has agreed to give me a diagnosis or an opinion. So he requested that I got my medical or my records back from any testing I had gotten done. Well, that tells me that this guy's a good guy because he at least wants to see what I've done, where I've been. It'll give him some sort of a point of reference without having to redo everything. Most doctors would just reorder all the tests because it costs them nothing. It's no skin off of their nose. Takes you all the hassle, time, and grief, money, expense, and all of that, but it gives him a current snapshot of what you're doing. It's probably a little better for him to have that than the old stuff, but a whole lot more worse for you because you got to take the time to do it all. You have to decide what's more important for you. Well, I went to the old doctor and I got all of the reports and I spent some time looking through them, and I'm continuing to do that. And I'm going to dissect and research statements that are made, references that are made. But the one thing that really got me was this original doctor who I was very supportive. I got a gut feeling. Turns out I am not good at that, but he more or less assured me, he says, I'm sure this is not cancerous. He says, the size of this lump and your general health tell me that this is not cancer. So it's some kind of a salivary gland that's gone haywire or something. They call it like a goiter or whatever. Who knows what it is? But he's like, I think you can confidently move forward to know that it's not cancerous, but it does need to go aesthetically and whatnot. And it's also sitting on your carotid artery. So eventually there could be complications with pain and range of mobility, nerve damage, all kinds of stuff. Okay, well, that's good. So for the next year, I'm in my mind going, okay, well, it's not cancer, so I can go forward and try to resolve this on my own at the same time. So I have been going through all kinds of things, and I've working with practitioners. I've done all kinds of, sauna, cold, diet, fasting, herbal treatments. I mean, I'm going at this with everything I can think of, and I'm currently working with a therapeutic dose of cannabis oil, which is its own journey. I'll be talking about that. Well, the last CT scan that I got after waiting about 6 months, because I was confident that I'm okay and I just need to get through this thing. I've allowed stress to get to me or whatever is causing this, who knows. And the last CT report says it might be squamous cell carcinoma, which is a really nasty cancer. And I'm like, oh, great. So this doctor might be completely wrong about didn't make a clear diagnosis, but he certainly led me to believe that he was very confident that things were a certain way. And now I have entirely the opposite point of view. And then as he's going through, when he got the report back, instead of contacting me and having a conversation, he ordered an appointment with the ENT, ear, nose, and throat specialist. And so I immediately called them as I was directed to. And they tell me, well, we just got the order. It hasn't been processed yet. And I thought to myself, okay, well, what do I do? You don't tell me what to do. You just tell me what you're doing. And so then I called my doctor and I says, hey, I'm being as proactive as I can. Try not to be a pain in the ass. I'm just trying to not waste any more time. If this thing is cancer, I need to be on it with everything I have and not miss out on anything because it's doing what it's doing while I'm doing what I'm doing. Okay. Well, my doctor says, oh, well, we submit it within 7 days. They'll probably have your appointment booked. And if you don't, call them back. So I call them back again. I mean, I'm just being Johnny on the spot, following up. I don't want to think I missed something. And I says, well, I just talked to my doctor and this is what they said. And is this right? Yeah, go ahead and just wait. And we'll contact you. Okay, well, it's now Thursday. Tomorrow's been a week and I've not heard anything from anybody. So just remembering this is my personal experience. And then finally, the other piece of the puzzle was the doctor ordered a needle biopsy. And that's the type of biopsy that I will not have. And I looked it up, and sure enough, there's a lot of doctors that agree with me that, yeah, needle biopsy presents a certain amount of risk. Now, I told a friend of mine who happens to be a doctor about this, and he's like, oh, well, they've all changed. I says, yeah, but you're the scientist. Your job is to get the best answer you can. Well, look what happens to all those, research monkeys and animals. Yeah, you get your best answer, they suffer and die. I'm sorry. Science isn't necessarily your friend or mine, but I'm going to be my best advocate. And so I rejected the needle biopsy. Now, I haven't gotten any kind of response from them yet, as I've rejected their course of action. But I find it concerning and just just concerning, I guess, is a good word, that this doctor who I trusted and believed had my best interest in mind has no problem ordering a procedure that could easily cause me a lot of harm and accelerate the nature of this thing, as well as give him, you know, clear information. Sometimes I know people that have had to have 3, 4 biopsies because they didn't get what they needed. So many ways things can go wrong. And that's been my experience so far with the system. And that's not to mention that I paid for some of these doctor visits, and I signed up about a year ago for Covered California, which is like the Obamacare project that we have. What we have, it's a PPO, and it's expensive. It's got a high deductible, but whatever, that's what it's going to take. If I have a surgery, I likely will not be able to afford to just pay for it out of pocket. And I don't think they'll do cash surgeries anymore without you paying up front. So I don't want to slow this thing down. So I've got the insurance that I have. Well, prior to getting that CT scan, what happens? Oh, well, they messed up your date of birth. And so we don't even see you in our system. This is after paying, more than $5,000 just to have this insurance. So folks, when it comes to our system, there's not one answer that I have for you. The suggestion that I have, that I found for myself, that's probably the most valuable, is to think for yourself. Take some time, get that second opinion, talk to people. Don't put anybody's opinion above your own. Do some research, but don't get lost in it, because you can find whatever information you're looking for more than likely. And don't just take a doctor's word because he tells you something. Spend a minute, do some thinking for yourself. All right. Well, this has been the Healthy Living Podcast. If you're interested in sitting and being a guest on this show, please get in touch with me. I'm easy to find. And thank you for all your support. This has been Healthy Living by Willow Creek Springs. We'll see you next time.